This podcast is brought to you by eHarmony, the dating app to find someone you can be yourself with. Why doesn't eHarmony allow copy and paste in first messages? Because you are unique, and your conversations should reflect that. eHarmony wants you to find someone who will get you. How are you going to know who gets you if people send you the same generic conversation starters they message everyone else? Conversations that actually help you get to know each other. Imagine that. Get who gets you on eHarmony. Sign up today.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th.
We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
In each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is writer, director, and producer Travis Stevens. A prolific horror producer, he broke out as a writer-director with 2019 film Girl on the Third Floor, which is very goopy and very good. And his follow-up feature film, JAKOB'S Wife, premiered at South by Southwest and is now available on VOD. Welcome to the show, Travis.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to talk about the vampire design in particular. But before we do get into JAKOB'S Wife, can you tell us how you got introduced to horror?
Yeah, I've shared this over the years, and it's my very first memory of being alive. It was peering through the vent of a 1970s van at a drive-in through the air vent at some sort of horror movie on the drive-in screen, which I believe may be The Island of Dr. Moreau.
Oh, wow.
Ooh.
So it was something that had been there in my sort of consciousness. I was born and raised in Vermont, which is, sort of a woodsy place. And so becoming heading into the teenage years, Friday the 13th, watching it at my friend's house. And I think we watched part 2 was the first one we saw. And I had to walk home through the woods. And
oh, no.
The sort of the last 10 feet of being in the woods, there was the woods, and then there was a big open yard, and then the front door of our house. And the last 10 feet of the woods in that big open yard was the most terrifying thing, because I was like, oh, this is right when you think you're out in the open, that's where you're going to be murdered. Although before then, it didn't occur to me that there'd be killers in the woods. But from that point forward, every time I walked through the woods, I felt like that. So
no, it's always that last dash to the door when they swoop down and get you.
And that's it. Mm-hmm. And I ran as fast as I could across that yard, with each step just being convinced that something was going to hit me in the back and kill me.
It's like when you run up the attic stairs, and you're in the, or not attic, basement stairs. You're like, it's going to get me when I turn off the light and have to sprint up. It's like a race.
Yeah. And you're going to trip. You're going to slip on one of the steps. You know it. And it's weird. And I don't know if, I've wondered if people sort of identify with the horror films that sort of reflect the environment that they're growing up in. because I had never really emotionally connected to the Halloween movies, and maybe in part of it was because the setting was so alien to me. But the Friday the 13th, just that idea of being out in the woods and having a beer and getting murdered, I was like, oh yeah, that's probably happening every weekend.
That's life around here.
Yeah.
So of the slashers, because you brought up Jason. So is Jason your favorite of that kind of 80s slasher craze?
Yeah, I mean, I feel embarrassed saying it because it's certainly not the most sophisticated, but that was sort of, I think there's a real meat and potatoes quality to that series that it worked, even if it's not the most nutritious meal.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with junk food.
Yeah.
No. So what were some of your horror favorites growing up as a kid?
I like the movies that felt like they were opening up a world that you didn't even know existed. Mm-hmm. So like Hellraiser was just, I was just like, what is this? Like, I mean, literally opens up a world, but that sense of danger that you feel while you're watching it, not just because of what's on screen, but because you're going, wait a second, what is out there in the world? Is this a normal thing? Like what is all of this stuff? And so, those were the ones. I mean, it was a small town with a couple of video stores, but there was not the depth of sort of, horror cinema available. So,
right.
A lot of the last, I don't know, whatever, 10, 15 years has been catch up and just sort of listening to podcasts and being like, how have I never seen this? And just having my mind blown.
I relate to that so much because my early childhood, I grew up in Alaska, and then we moved to the center of the country in Nebraska. So like my horror education was those big, the Fridays, the Jasons, the Nightmare on Elm Streets, the Blobs, like that 80s, like the bigger budget ones. Like there's a whole lot of movies, including the one we're going to talk about tonight, that I never saw until much, much older.
Yeah. And it's great because I find there are certainly people that you meet, friends, or even just people you listen to, where you're just like, wow, like you were tapped into everything at such an early age. And I can appreciate that. But, you sort of come across stuff the way the universe intends you to. And for me, similar is the big budget stuff. But again, I think that's what I admire so much is like there were these bigger budget movies that were still weird as fuck. And like the people under the stairs, like I was just
oh my God.
I was like, wait, what? like who is this couple? What is this movie? Like,
oh my God. When I first watched that this year, and I was like, this is not what I expected. What the fuck is happening? Like, this is a movie that like is a classic, and this is not at all what I expected. It's so weird.
Yeah, just operating on its own sort of rhythm and own logic, and is also something that there's just this like really not extreme, that's not the right word, but like a really strong flavor of what the fuck in something that is designed to be a pretty commercial, I'll say product, but the fetish stuff in that, you're just sort of like, it feels so dangerous. You're like, whoa. I
love it when a movie can do that, when it is a bigger budget type film, but it still is able to be as weird as People Under the Stairs. That's such a fascinating movie because of the fact that it was, Wes Craven and operating in the 90s. Like it amazes me that stuff like that can get made. I love it.
Yeah. And, it's happening less and less. So I think,
independent films.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. But okay. So when I had originally reached out to you, one of the problems with the podcast is that, there's a lot of movies that scare people that we end up covering already. And you had mentioned The Watch in the Woods, which we had already talked about. But I am curious, what was it about the movie that affected you as a kid?
Again, probably setting, but I think it was one of the first movies I went to alone. And I don't know why. I think it was a double feature with the Headless Horseman, the animated one.
Oh yeah.
So I think it was like a matinee showing, and maybe my parents maybe we all thought I was just going to see a animated movie for kids. But watching that and the moments of sort of, I think it was the drowning and the writing of the word in the glass, in the breath on the glass, like just these images were so strong.
Yeah.
And like I was just shook. And I think that movie really has a really effective, oppressive tone. Like it feels not evil, but you definitely feel that sense of danger from it.
Well, it doesn't feel like a typical, like what we would consider a kid's movie either.
Yeah. There's an unhinged, like really sort of edge to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as an adult, what would you say draws you to horror now?
I mean, it's such a malleable genre where you can explore so many different things. I don't know. I think you're just craving something to be transported, to feel something that maybe you haven't felt before, or to see something explored in a new way. And perhaps this is happening in other genres, but consistently there'll be a movie that comes on the radar, either from the festival circuit or reviews or whatever. And I'm just amazed by some aspect of it, whether it's the aesthetics or the ideas or the performance or the execution, sometimes all of them. But there just seems to be so many interesting opportunities there for filmmakers to do different things. So yeah, I mean, I would never be like, oh, I only like horror movies, because it's not true.
Right.
I love movies and cinemas and feeling stuff, but there's this consistency to the genre that just keep paying off, more often than not. And even the movies that I watch and am hypercritical of, I could see something of value in there.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of them.
Yeah.
Sorry to be a dick so early into the episode.
No.
So do you ever get like that childhood fear watching horror still? Because I know, Terry and I often talk about how we're a little bit jaded at this point after watching so many horror movies. So do you get scared still from horror?
Yes, not like you, I'm sure, not as often. And I think especially it becomes easier and easier or it becomes harder and harder to turn off the part of your brain that's deconstructing and evaluating the
tell me about
mechanics of what's happening. Yeah. But there have been times, I mean, like when I watched The Witch, I had a link before it came out, and I watched it. We were shooting in Montana, and it was a cold and windy night. I was in bed watching it on a tiny laptop and was absolutely fucking terrified. And at the same time, I couldn't believe it. I wanted to like text people and be like, oh, I'm so fucking scared right now. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. So yeah, and there's, there are certainly times where even if the whole movie, I'm not terrified, I'm still getting swept away occasionally. I found The Empty Man really a fascinating watch, because you just didn't know what was going to happen next.
I know.
Oh my God. Empty Man forever.
We're huge fans. We're huge fans of that film.
Yeah. And that's, and I think it goes back to, when you had asked sort of like, what draws me to horror, it's like, because there's still room in it to do things like that, where you can just sort of rip the rug out from under the audience. And it's happening less and less. Like more and more movies, almost movies and all entertainment, just is so designed to do one thing. And I think as an audience, we're just as attuned to the way things work as the people creating it. And so we just are all sort of sitting at the table, going through the motions, and there's not as much sort of unknown and creative sort of discovery happening. So when you see it like this, when a movie gets through, and it gets through at a level where they have the budget to do things that you normally wouldn't be able to do if nobody was paying attention, like it's something to be celebrated.
I mean, that's another movie, sort of like going back to People Under the Stairs. It's a movie that has a really, I mean, it looks beautiful. And you're also wondering, how did this get made? Because it's, you know, it's over 2 hours long. It's wild. It has this bizarre cold open. But that's, like you said, that I love that because it does catch you by surprise.
Yeah, my experience watching that movie was constantly reminding myself, or the movie reminded me, that I don't know as much as I think I know. Because about 10 minutes into that cold open, I was already thinking about what my tweet was going to be, and comparing it to like Scott Smith's The Ruins. I'll be another entry like The Ruins that takes you tourists and puts them into an environment, and then it's like, wait, what? Where are we now?
Nope.
What is this? And then being like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. And then suddenly it's this, you know, mainstream teen horror movie. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah. And by the third time they had done that, I was just like, well, just sit back, bud, because you're not that smart and the movie's way ahead of you. So enjoy it.
Oh, man, I love that.
Oh, it's such a good movie.
So, transitioning from talking about other people's movies, let's talk about Jacob's Wife. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what the movie is about?
Jacob's Wife is the story of Ann Fetter, who's been married to Pastor Jacob Fetter for 30 years and feels that her life has gotten small and she has been strangled by her relationship. And it's the story of a woman who, through a sort of a fantastic event, rediscovers her own voice and her own agency. So yeah, it's basically a marriage drama that goes batshit insane once a vampire bites the lead character.
Well, okay, so what I love so much about this movie is getting Barbara and Larry together. And I know they were in, you know, You're Next together, but but they never acted against each other in that movie. So seeing the two of them together in this film, it reminded me how much of a powerhouse they both are and how much of a mainstay they are in independent horror. How did this all come together?
Well, so when I had read the script, because Barbara had found it and nurtured it and developed it, and she had sent it to me and said, hey, I this is a passion project of mine and I'm going to produce it, and would you read it as a favor? And my reaction immediately was, yeah, you're a friend and I want to do everything I can to help you. And while reading it, I saw the potential for what this could be for her, not just as a movie, but as a sort of a launching pad for the next stage of her career, both as a producer and as an actor. So even before finishing the script, it was the thought process of, okay, well, how would one go about engineering up a shoot that would allow her to launch, basically? And one of the things was looking for moments in this script that give her a chance to demonstrate a different type of acting than she has in some of the more recent horror films that she had been in, really trying to find more, I think actors call them private moments or internal moments, sort of expand the space in the script for that character and for her to exist so that we can really get a sense of who this person is before this crazy shit happens. And so that's like on a script writing level. But how do you go about filming that? Especially on a low budget movie where there's not as much prep time. Mm-hmm. For Barbara too, it's a different style of acting. Yeah. So all of those elements, I was just like, well, Larry comes from a school of sort of a more grounded, naturalistic performance. He's also a filmmaker, which gives you a nimbleness and an understanding of what the intention of a scene is. Like, I was just like, with Larry there and her, I think she would have the support, and I would have the support, to be honest, for us to capture something that feels more truthful than whatever was on the page. So that was it. Now, we had all worked together on Ted Gagan's We Are Still Here.
Oh, that's right.
And so I had seen sort of what both brought to a scene. And especially what they brought behind the scenes. And it just seemed like a pairing that would accomplish goal number one, which is helping Barbara sort of have this showcase. That was a really long answer, and I understand if you just want to cut it up.
No, it's fascinating.
No, it's amazing because, I mean, this is like, Barbara is like mind blowing in this movie. Like, she's in so much, but the way that the script really gives her room to like experiment and work with like her facial expressions and kind of a quieter role is absolutely fantastic. And the way you directed her and her performance and like Larry supporting her, like she is such an amazing character and an amazing performer.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm really glad that people get to see it. No, I mean, it's so like over the course of talking about this movie, you are focused on different things, but recently, I'd even say through this weekend, now that it's released and I've gotten a bit of perspective on it, it really comes back to what was the primary goal with this movie. And it was to give Barbara Crampton her Ellen Burstyn performance or Gina Rowlands style performance, like a showcase performance. Oh. And despite any of the faults of the film or any of the criticism of the film, pretty uniformly, people are seeing and appreciating her and her acting. And it feels great because it's like, cool, we did it.
It feels as propulsive, her role in this, as propulsive as it was in Your Next, where that kind of brought her back to the horror forefront. And then this movie sort of takes that and pushes it even forward, in my opinion. You know, you were talking a little earlier about the sort of the private moments or that kind of moment that actors are looking for. And one of my favorite scenes in this film, this isn't really a question, it's just sort of like a kudos, is the scene where they're at dinner after she's been bitten. And it feels almost like a fencing match between the two, where she flirts with the waiter and then he tries to assert his dominance by saying, "Can you get a box for my wife?" And then she's like, "I'm not going to eat it. I'm done with it." And it's just that small conversation followed by the sort of looks and the focus on like his Adam's apple and the focus on like that kind of thing, that it brings me a whole new appreciation for both of them together, to be perfectly honest. Yeah.
I mean, in the design of how to try to capture some life here or capture that dynamic between them, I produced a bunch of films and I made another film, and I thought one way to do it would be to shoot with two cameras for these sort of conversation scenes, dinner scenes, stuff like that, so that you'd basically double the amount of time you could spend shooting the thing. And that would give the actors a little, and myself, more time to sort of evolve and discover the scene. I mean, they came prepared, but we also had time to shoot and really capture that stuff and find those sort of punctuation marks, visual punctuation marks for what was going on. And to go back to being prepared, I read an interview with Larry today where he had been talking about one of his favorite aspects of it is in pre-production, I had sent them both sort of a list of questions to help them sort of fill in the backstory of their characters, and really specific stuff like, who was the first person your character dated? Was it your spouse? Who was the first person they had sex with? Who did you vote for in the last 4 elections? All these little basically points of like fence posts to put in there so that we could start sort of building the shape of what their life together was. Where did you go to high school? Have you ever been fired? Like really, really just sort of like things that are not in the script and things that did not end up in the movie necessarily, but allowed us to then come together and have conversations to define their relationship. It's like, that's the fun part of the process. That's the artistic part and the creative part. And yeah, so with both of those things, I think that's part of why those intimate scenes, even if there's not as much dialogue in the exchanges, giving information, I think both of the actors were so attuned to exactly where they were in this domestic battle as characters that they were more prepared for it.
Yeah. And so Vampires. I love vampires.
Yeah. And then the other thing.
And then, the vampire aspect. Yeah. So I love this, like, this interpretation of the vampire is amazing. Like, it is this kind of like freeing. It's freeing instead of necessarily this kind of like torturous immortality. I liked this kind of looking at being a vampire as an escape from domestic life, and how the master is this androgynous creature that is like, you can escape the way you're living now and do something different. So what was it like, what was the inspiration for creating such a cool interpretation of the vampire?
I think there were multiple sort of aspects that all came together, which was in the original script, the master had been more traditional male suitor character.
Okay.
And in looking at it and trying to figure out, what could we do to sort of land this theme differently, it just was clear, like, well, if you change the gender, so you're removing the suitor aspect of it, that opens it up a lot. And once you do that, then there was this other sort of thought process of wanting to honor classic vampire movies and knowing that I wanted this movie to sort of transform with Anne over the course. And so to end up in a place where in the last act of the movie, you're really 100% in an over-the-top 80s style vampire movie.
Yes.
It seemed like, okay, so here's a way to do both and also do something new. So there's like the sort of thematic motivation and then tonal motivation and aesthetic motivation. Because to be honest, there are so many alt vampire movies that I love, but also I like a capital V vampire movie. And it was so nice to do that and be like, here she is. This is a motherfucking vampire who just walked into the scene. We're not playing around.
I love that. And Bonnie Aaron seems to have such a good time with this role. Like, she just seems to be eating it up. No pun intended, but I love her in this performance.
Yeah. It's, similar to what happened with Barbara and to a certain extent, Larry too, where we're sort of like, hey, here are some actors who are really experienced and maybe, not typecast. I don't want to say that, but maybe they don't often have roles that give them as much to do. I mean, Bonnie was another actor who's clearly had some huge cinematic moments in her career that everybody is just like, holy shit, I love that scene. But, the dialogue and stuff was something that was a new chance for her. To show in this. And so when we were talking about it, and just to be clear, like, I'm not saying like I'm some sort of genius. This was a group sort of exploration of hey, this is kind of cool. We're heading in this direction and maybe this makes sense to do over here as well. But in talking with Bonnie, I think it was just fun because basically my note to her was just, you need to play this like a rich divorcee.
Oh my God.
It's just all you want to do is just tell this girl, you don't need to settle. Your life can be whatever it wants. Let's go have a drink. And
I love that because I could see that. The moment you say that, it comes perfectly into relief. Yes.
Yeah. And
yes.
But that's the energy. It's like, and again, you're trying to do something new with these tropes. And yeah, it was cool. It was cool. And I mean, she's an amazing person, amazing to work with. And again, it's nice to see people recognize her performance. And I hope we get to see lots more Bonnie Aaron.
Me too. Oh, so before we do wrap up this portion of it, I got to say, Tara Bush, composer, vinyl, when?
In the works. I think by the time this airs, the digital release news will be out there, as well as perhaps the record itself. And then talks are underway about the hot wax version of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hot wax.
And she's
hot
amazing
wax.
to work with. She's an amazing musician. And on this sort of sculpting this 80s style score where not just because it was synth, but like like going back to Friday the 13th, like I would just send example after example of scenes where it's not the most sophisticated music in Friday the 13th, but the space in between the notes and the instrumentation choices accent what's happening on screen so effectively. And that's something that really has fallen out of vogue with like modern horror films, which tend to be almost more sound design score. And so working with Tara on coming up with something that dings, dongs, and sort of moves through in that sort of like throwback style was a lot of fun.
Plus, I just got to say, loved hearing Concrete Blonde.
Yeah. I mean, it's, certainly it's been done, but before. But I think I remembered when I was, whatever it was, 14 or 15, and wearing pirate shirts that I had ordered from Los Angeles that came in the mail, and reading Anne Rice, and hanging out with my goth girlfriend in a cabin in Vermont, listening to Jeanette and Concrete Blonde. That was as vampire-y as you could possibly be. And so for me personally, I was like, it is going in the movie. So we had it recorded before we shot, so we could actually, just Barbara could dance to the actual song.
I love that.
Just thinking ideal situation, goth couple in the woods listening to
it was. I mean, this is what you're trying to find your connection to the material, right? And what is it? What is it that made you feel? What is it about it that has some kernel of truth to it? And that was
so.
Fun.
Travis, we've talked about your horror history, we've talked about Jacob's Wife, but what movie did you bring with you to discuss today?
I would love to talk about Ken Hughes' Night School.
I would love to talk about this too.
I would love to. So the first synopsis I'm going to read of Night School is very dumb, but it's very funny. It's like a tagline. Who's been decapitating the innocent girls at a local night school? The police are baffled.
That is literally the line at the top of IMDb.
It's like the main synopsis for this movie, which is not.
It's awesome, but it doesn't really tell you anything.
But to get a better sense of the film, a Boston police detective investigates a series of gruesome decapitations of various college co-eds committed by a helmeted, black leather-clad serial killer, which leads him to suspect a well-known anthropology professor as more than just an adulterous teacher.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
So, Travis, I got to know, give us your horror story with this movie. How old were you? How did you see it? When did you see it? Give us all those dirty details.
All right. I am going to try to set the stage here by doing some math, which will take a second. I was born in 72. Okay. So I would have been either 9 or 10 years old. And our family was moving from a house in New Hampshire about 10 minutes away to our house in Vermont. And during the move, my parents said, hey, maybe it's better if you're with a babysitter while we do all this move. So my experience with this movie was sitting on a couch in a living room in some stranger's house.
Oh, boy.
And they just sort of put on the TV. And this movie was playing. And at the end, it was nighttime when my parents came to pick me up. We went to our new house, and I went to my bedroom for the first time to go to bed. I got into bed, and there was a direct line of sight from my bed, from my pillow, through my door, through the bathroom door, into the toilet. There is a scene in this movie featuring a toilet that is so fucking horrifying. And I was seized with fear and got out of bed, had to go and sleep downstairs. I think I slept downstairs for the first few nights in that new place. So
you obviously can't see my face, but I just put my hands in front of my mouth when you said that, because I'm just imagining 10-year-old Travis just seeing a decapitated head in this gross toilet, and that is being the image you're carrying with yourself to the new house. Oh my God.
Yeah, and there was something, because the house wasn't fully unpacked, So the house itself was a little stripped down and bare, which kind of felt a bit more like the movie bathroom. Like there wasn't, I mean, it was a set basically to me. It was the first time I had ever been there. And here's this thing. And literally like we basically finished the movie and I got in a car and went to this. So yeah, it really struck me. And there's such just a sleazy quality to this movie that no 10-year-old should ever experience. You know, well, I mean, yeah, if you want to turn out awesome, maybe you should experience it.
So we have the decapitated head in the toilet, which is probably the high point for me in terms of this, like the griminess of this film. But were there other sequences that stood out to you when you were a kid? Or was it just that moment?
I don't want to ruin it for everybody, but we're
going to go spoilers. Okay. We're going to talk about this. We're tearing this movie apart. Yeah. We're going to talk everything.
Every single time they find a fucking head, I'm like, that's absolutely terrifying. The turtles, the soup, the turtles. Like it is so mean spirited.
Yes.
And this is the director of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
I know. So his last movie too.
Yeah. Well, because he realized, fuck it. I have made one of the greatest horror films of all time. I can step on to the next phase of my life. Why fuck around anymore?
I mean, you go from, Casino Royale to Chitty Chitty Bang Bang to Night School. That is quite a trajectory, right? Yes, range, absolutely.
The range.
Yeah, and there's, at the time I didn't understand it, and maybe we won't be able to speak to it with the best perspective now, but just the fact that it was a female killer who was pissed off.
Yeah.
Oh,
it was such a surprising reveal. Like I couldn't wrap my head around it then, and even later in life, it was like that's so fresh. And like to be pissed off and to have a reason for why she was doing what she was doing just felt like different and again, not more dangerous, but just sort of like, oh, wait, what? This can happen?
I almost I gasped so loud at that moment. I was like, oh, this is the best movie I've ever seen now. Like, yeah. I love a movie with a female killer, and it's so hard to find. It's like not very common, especially in slashers. And this one, I was like, oh my God, she was the final girl, but actually she was the killer all along. And it's such we'll get to this later, but like the gender dynamics of this film are very fascinating. And then her reasoning for being the killer is just so wild and cool. And I don't know if cool is the right word, but I just love the construction of her character, and that was how they decided to end it. Like, I saw a lot of parallels with this with Black Christmas, especially with discussions of like abortion and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was my kitten trying to get out of the. Yep. Yep.
The joys of podcasting. She has a little Siamese cat that is just goes from demure to playful in like an instant.
Amazing. Mike, that
okay,
cat.
we're good.
I want
Sorry
to hear
about
from
that. She will too. She has a lot to say.
She's
got a lot of opinions.
She's a critic in training.
She is a critic in training, and like the little like thing that makes the noise, like the door stopper that you can flick and it makes that loud ass noise. She knows that if she hits it enough times, we'll let her out of the room or like do something
she's
for her.
You.
Like she's too smart. It's a problem. Anyway,
my partner calls cats pillows with knives for fingers.
I love it.
Wow. That's amazing.
One more thing about Night School that even at a young age made such an impression was the sort of look of the killer and the weapon the killer used was so real world. You could wrap your head around it, but also exaggerated. And it was just sort of like, what is this? Like, what is that knife? You know?
There's not enough kukri slashers.
Yeah. Oof.
Also, I felt very excited that I've seen that before in Forged in Fire, the knife making show on History Channel. It's just been like one of my go-to pandemic shows. But it's it's so much scarier than a knife because it's got that curve in it, and there's something even more cruel about it than like the typical machete that we see or like big knife that we see.
And I'm sure it's got to be intentional, but that is a very phallic weapon.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It really
and
is.
It's like all those things add up, you know, and you're just watching this thing that on its surface is one thing, but it's like there's all of these decisions that have been made in the creation of this thing that you think you have your head wrapped around that are really fucking clever.
Yeah. So I kind of, that is the thing that jumped out at me at this, with this viewing in particular, was the flow of this movie, where it starts with of course, the first death. And then we're following Judd, the policeman, the detective. And when he goes to the school, all of a sudden the story transitions from being about him, and it introduces Eleanor, who of course we're expecting to be the final girl, and it follows her for a bit. And then it goes to Kim for her death. But the way the story just sort of flows from being this detective story to being a slasher movie and then back to a detective story is really fascinating for a 1981 slasher.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe this is because the filmmaker had come from such big movies, right? Like maybe he just brought a level of experience and craftsmanship well beyond what this movie would normally receive, you know, because it really does, even visually. It's sophisticated in how it moves through these sequences. This is not just a, you know, static camera, you know, sort of those tropes that were being used, you know, time and time again in the slashers of the era. This thing has a much more, it flows much more like a roller coaster than just got no analogy here. So
like a Friday the 13th or something like that, honestly. Totally. I mean,
totally, where it's just a smash cut, you know, here comes the weapon down and cut to black. Like, no, this is a much slicker looking and constructed.
You brought up, Mary Beth, the aquarium scene with the killer lurking.
Like the editing in this movie, and this is with the aquariums, the killer, because it's like I was like, oh, they're just at the aquarium. This is really weird. Just like these quick shots of the person, the diver, feeding the sea turtles and the sharks, and then you just see the killer kind of peek his head or her head around the corner and then disappear. And I was like, what's happening? And then, you know, he reveals that the diver is a woman and all this stuff. But then when he cuts off her head and then he decks the sea turtle with the head, like his sea turtle it hits the sea turtle and it's like, what is this? And it's just a head. And it's these creative moments that I've never seen before in like a slasher. And this, like you said, Travis, it's like, it's mean, but it's so different. And like the editing also, there's that scene when Eleanor's in the shower and there's some, like has run away from someone following her and she locks the door and she's in the shower and you're waiting, like it's her, and then it quick cuts to a hand ringing the doorbell and then the shower head, and it's like all these really fascinating quick cuts where you don't know what's going to happen or you think you know what's going to happen. And this movie is just all about red herrings, like all around, and it knows exactly what it's doing, and it's so smart in how it's like, oop, you think you know what's going to happen, but you don't. You think this is the killer? No, it's not. You think this is going to happen to her? No, it's not. And it's just so smart.
Yeah. And I wonder if, and this is pure speculation, but I wonder if maybe Ken Hughes, like, not looked down his nose at the genre, but maybe coming from what he came from, he brought that mean-spiritedness in, like almost like oh yeah, you want to see this? Let's take it even further, you know, because there is a lot of specificity to those moments, like the ones you just discussed, and really, really pitch black humor to it. I mean, in that aquarium scene, when you cut outside and there's the couple walking down, and it's the aquarium's built into the side of a building, and you just see the turtles pecking out the flesh of the neck, and this couple is sitting there watching.
Oh my God.
Like that is hilarious and so gruesome. And it's you know, I mean, to end these sequences with that kind of punctuation mark is, you know, again, very specific and something that, you know, that it's got to come from the filmmaker just being like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to fucking do it. And I would like to talk about another thing, which, if memory serves me right, doesn't the cop have a sidekick buddy who's like eating all the time? And like
he does. Yep, Taj.
Yeah.
The tuna fish after like they go and find her head in the aquarium, and he's like, "What you got? I'll take some of that." And he's like, "It's tuna fish," and he takes it out of his mouth and hands it back. Like,
yeah, exactly. Like again, just this like weird vein of just like absurdity and humor, and also, you know, I mean, that's great casting to have in a movie and just be like, yeah, this is what life looks like, and here we go. Like,
well, that their partnership together feels like in a completely different movie, it would be a buddy cop comedy. Just their kind of playfulness, where he's like, I don't know why I stand with you, and Taj is like, because I'm lovable. Like they just have this easygoing banter back and forth that you can tell they're friends as well as partners, and have been for such a long time that they know how to, you know, jab each other or push the buttons. But you also talked about the humor, and my favorite scene on this rewatch was after in the diner when the owner comes in the morning after poor Carol has been killed, and when she dies, she had taken out this giant stock pot. She's like, that's not supposed to be in the fridge, and she puts it up on the counter, and then of course she gets killed and decapitated. And at this point, we've come to expect that the head is going to be in some liquid, and so when Gus puts that stock pot back up on the boiler and serves food to the construction workers and they eat a piece of hair, I'm just like, oh God, there is a head in that stock pot, but it's not. And he plays with you by Gus pouring it out, and you're expecting the head to come rolling out. And of course it doesn't. And then it becomes an almost like hide and seek game where like he's, you know, riffling through the cupboards and he's opening things, and you're expecting the head to just fall out at some point, and then it's finally revealed to be in the sink. But it's very playful and cheeky and mean spirited in a way.
Yeah, it's masterful. And you know, it's something that I've talked a lot with other filmmakers about, and certainly in my own experience, analyzing why aren't we having moments like that in movies anymore, or less often, or, well, I'm going to simplify it even more. Why aren't there more moments like that in my movies? And it's, you know, it starts at the script stage, clearly, but honestly, it's also the amount of time you have to shoot a movie, because maybe that was in the script, or maybe the day they were shooting, or the few days they were shooting that scene back then, the director was just sort of like, well, what can we do to drag this moment out more? Well, you know, and you would have the time and the luxury in that space to really start playing and building this stuff out more. Because when you read these older screenplays, sometimes they're very, you know, sparse in what is being described in the action,
right?
You know, and again, this is pure speculation. I haven't read the original script for this. Maybe it's in there, and the screenwriter is a fucking genius, and I owe him an apology. But conceptually, those are the types of things that can happen.
Yeah, it's also interesting though, because the screenwriter, her name, it's Ruth Avergon, so it's a female screenwriter, which you don't see a whole lot of for slasher films. But this is like her only movie that she's written. And so it makes me curious about like, what happened to you, Ruth? Where did you go? Why are you no longer making movies? Why was it just this one script?
It's based on her life, and she got it out.
And she's
there,
Eleanor?
Yes, exactly.
Oh my God, this is her like very sneaky admission that she in fact is an Eleanor all along, and her lover took one for the team.
I'm going to start looking at decapitations in Boston in the 70s and see if there's an unsolved cold case.
Yeah, it would be interesting to track down, you know, who she was before then, and after then.
Yeah, I just it always makes me so sad when I see that there's like a movie that comes across that's so assured as this film, and it could be because of Ken. You know, we don't know, but whatever happened with the writer when it's only like one script. Because this is a good segue to talk about. I want to talk about Eleanor. I want to talk about all of it. So the reason why she is killing these women seems a little. I think that this movie tackles internalized misogyny like a lot. Like all of the characters in this film I guess all the main characters, the cop, you'd mentioned Mary Beth to me offline about how he kind of is teasing his girlfriend / I think it's his girlfriend about like make me eggs slave, I think is his comment. And it's a tease, yes. But like that is for our first introduction to Judd and the only introduction to his partner.
His only introduction. She never shows up again. And I will say, I did think for like a hot second when before Eleanor was revealed, I'm like, wait, I wonder if his partner is the killer, because like he keeps leaving. I mean, I don't know. I was just like in my head, I'm like, what if she ends up being the bad guy? But like the gender dynamics are off the bat set. Like it's a slasher movie. So, you know, we come to expect these very like tilted gender dynamics where women are kind of treated poorly and, you know, misogyny. But this movie, I feel like, especially knowing that there's a female writer, there's a lot of really pointed looks at that. And I think, especially in having Eleanor be the killer, I think it really gets to that point very well.
And she gets away with it in the end, which I loved.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
She gets away with it.
I guess I'm a little bit simpler, which is, you cheated on your partner, you know, but everything's justified. Go for it. All acts of revenge, go for it. Even, you know. So I did think at the time, but of course, when I watched it, it wasn't as evolved. I was 9. I was 10. You know, I didn't really quite understand.
What was your gender reading when you were 9 years old, Travis?
I was like, I apparently really like people in leather. So whatever gender that is, I was just. Yeah.
I mean, same. I just am allergic to it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Oh, the cruel, cruel irony.
I know, right?
But that like with Eleanor comes the professor, this anthropology professor, who is such an asshole. Like, you know, he is introduced as this kind of, he's the, you know, the male professor at this school of women, and very much off the bat, they're like, have that dynamic where he is the man in power and he takes advantage of all of these women kind of fawning all over him. So while Eleanor is his main partner, maybe he is also has all of his side chicks, and he doesn't care about any of this. And it's so funny. He's so obviously set up to be the killer that I knew right off the bat that he wasn't the killer. I was like, this is just way too obvious.
Yeah, my memory, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but it felt like almost like he was sort of using his field of study as like his game on these students. Like I just had this memory of sort of being like, wait a second, because is he a anthropologist? What was his field of study?
Yeah, anthropology.
Yeah, my memory was just sort of like feeling like, oh, this guy's just like using this as a front to mac on everybody and to seem like basically sophisticated and an ally, and actually being a trash.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I agree with you 100%. But you know, the movie does an interesting thing where it compares people in power and those not in power, because also his foil is the headmistress, who is also in power over this troop of young women, and she uses it to get one of the women in bed. Like, so you have this sort of, I mean, on one hand, I was kind of like, we got a predatory gay trope in the 1980s, big surprise. But it's also like comparing the two, where she is so upset with him, and she even talks at one point that, you know, I'm going to fire him. He can't be taking advantage of these young girls. By the way, Kathy, would you like to sleep over at my house tonight? Like the dynamics between the two couldn't be more apparent. And for the longest time, even on this rewatch, because I saw this a few years ago, and on this rewatch, I completely forgot that it was Eleanor. I thought again that it was Helene, I think is her name, Helene Griffin, the headmistress, that was the killer, because obviously it couldn't be the professor, because like you were saying, Mary Beth, that it seems to be so focused on him as being it. But her dynamic is so interesting to the story, even though it kind of falls into that trope.
Yeah, and I 100% was not expecting there to be like this queer, like very brief storyline. And like, you know, obviously it's the 80s, but I would have loved a movie where it's about her like being very manipulative and something like that. But maybe we can remake it. Travis, can you remake this movie and change the story to be gayer?
That was going to be my question to you guys. I would work for free for as long as it took to help this movie get remade. But I think I'd love to see a woman direct it.
Yeah, no.
Right. I was texting Terry and I was like, this is remade as a giallo rape revenge movie directed by a woman.
Yeah. So
like I have a vision.
And that was going to be my question. Who should direct this?
I would love to see, is it Coralie? I've never actually said her name out.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. The director of Revenge, Coralie Farge, I think is how you say it.
I've never said her name out loud. I've always just written it.
Yeah, because she would bring, one of the qualities this had was this cosmopolitan slickness to it and the sort of, you felt like you were in the city and the lighting. Obviously giallo kind of influenced, but it also felt a little more contemporary and less sort of stage theatrical. And that's something that she could absolutely nail.
Yeah, everyone calls this like an American giallo, and I can totally see it because you have a lot of the tropes. Obviously it's gender bent, but like the focus on the killer's hands, the black gloves, the black outfit, the use of the knife, like the police procedural aspect of it. There's a lot of things that kind of feel like this was definitely influenced by some of the giallo from the 70s.
Yeah, but far more crazy. Maybe maybe far more is not accurate, but it's fucking crazy, and everybody better watch it.
Absolutely.
Yes. Like I was like, how have I never heard of this movie before? How have I never seen it? Why is not everyone talking about this? I feel like, this is the kind of slasher that I feel like so many people would be into now, especially as like, horror is evolving and there's just so many amazing movies out there. I feel like Night School is such a good example of one of these movies that needs to have like a renaissance and like a rebirth of people appreciating it, because holy shit, it's so crazy and it's so good and it's so weird. Like it's just so different from anything else out there, and it deserves just to be recognized for that creativity alone.
And I think there's, we've talked about so many different aspects of this, but there's so much. Like basically you've got a movie here that has a core concept of how this killer functions that is really, really clever, and a new screenwriter could just riff on basically, not to spoil it, but okay, what type of sequences can I create that end up with a head in water? Like that right there. It's like almost like a Final Destination challenge for screenwriting.
Oh my God.
Where there's a dynamic to it that is just so specific that can really be a jumping off point for a writer. And then there's the look, and then there's the gender dynamics aspect of it. There's so much that is specific to this, and how they all work together is really fascinating.
Yeah. So, I was thinking back about this movie because the reason I never saw this as a kid. It was one of those movies, you probably have experienced this as well, Travis, where you're a kid and you're walking through the VHS aisle in the horror section, and you see these covers and they sort of like, they pull you to it because like the covers in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s were so evocative and so interesting. And I remember this cover because it was basically like a school photo of Eleanor, except that it was cut in half, and there's like, you see the blade of the kukri on the side, and then there's like a blood splat. And I remember being a kid and thinking, oh my God, you can die at night school? Like you could die at school in this? And that was my only interaction with this film until about, I don't remember, it was like maybe 3 years ago. And I was, again, like you had mentioned earlier, when you are discovering movies, I was listening to a podcast and someone was talking about it and they brought up the queer element to it. And I was like, oh, I absolutely have to watch this now. And yes, Mary Beth, I am surprised that this movie doesn't get talked about as much, particularly since it is celebrating its 40th birthday this September.
Holy shit, 40.
Is that
time?
Is that a MILF or a kill? Like a movie I'd like to fuck at that age? When it was 40? How does it work? We need a new acronym.
Okay, speaking of like to fuck, this shower. That's a good segue.
I'd like to fuck.
There you go. This is a good segue. This scene, the one quote unquote sex scene where it is between Eleanor and the professor in the shower, and he is smothering her in strawberry preserves, maybe? Do you remember this at all, Travis?
I did not until you said strawberry preserves, and then suddenly it came back. It's like, yeah. I mean,
I'm not here to kink shame, but like, I don't get this scene. It's. I guess it's supposed to emphasize the sort of ritualistic nature that they talk about with their setting, but like, they're literally sitting in there, and he is smothering. It looks like strawberry chunky jelly on her body.
Yeah.
It kind of looks like the jelly from Poltergeist when they fall out of like.
Oh, it does.
Yeah, well, I think it has sort of like a not a cannibalistic quality too, but my memory was that it sort of felt familiar, like there was a sort of a correlation to some of the anthropology stuff that we had either seen in the movie or some aspect to it. So there was like a raw, both in what those characters are going through, and I think also sort of what they're trying to sort of relate it to.
Well, and again, the camera is playful because it first focuses on the bathtub full of like, it looks like it's full of red, like blood. And then it reveals that they're just in there being painted with jelly. But it's again, the way that the camera and Ken Hughes plays with expectations. Cause I was thinking earlier when you were talking, Mary Beth, about the way that shower scene is initially constructed, where she thinks someone's in the house, and it reminds me of Psycho, where there's like the focus on the shower head, and we get the camera is actually inside the shower with her, and we see a form moving through the sort of, it almost looks like a body bag, like the curtain is like plastic in a way that body bags are in films, and she sees like a form coming in the room. And it reminded me a lot of Psycho in particular, with that kind of homage.
I felt the same way too. And I was waiting for like the Psycho, like knife and her screaming. But of course, like he probably knew that's what we were going to think. And it just was playing with the expectations.
Instead we get shower jelly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Just rubbing it in her mouth and kissing it out of her mouth. And I was like, all right, I mean, okay, do what you feel, but this is a very strange moment. Like, it's the only sex scene in the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
or sex in scare quotes, but you know.
And I guess sex. I just go like, yes, please, more of that. Like these things, these turns. Like movies need more things where you're sort of like, wait, where the fuck am I right now? Like, what is it? Because have they done this before? Like, is this their thing? Like, what? Like. That when a movie presents something as strange as that as just a normal thing that you're just supposed to accept, I'm like, fuck yeah, cinema. That's it. Let's go.
It's so true. It's just like it happens and then it's never discussed, and you're like, oh, fucking sweet. All right.
Yeah, you just roll with it. And nowadays the movies explain every single second that's happening on screen, and I don't know. I find as an audience, you're like, yeah.
We get it. Let's move on. Yeah. No, I
like it
100%. Although I have to say that I would have loved to hear a little bit of exposition about what that jelly is. Cause I sat there for a good 5 minutes just thinking, what is that? And I actually went to IMDb, because sometimes people on IMDb are like crazy, like very focused on delivering a complete plot synopsis of point by point. Yeah. And I was hoping that someone had some kind of insight, but I can't find a single thing about what that was.
They were probably like, no one's gonna think about this, and then here we are, like, what is 40 years the jelly? Later.
Yeah,
I'm gonna pitch a piece like that closer to the anniversary. What was the jelly, and why was it this way? An expose, and just write about this like 1 minute long scene.
Yeah. More, gross foods and horror films, please.
Oh, yes.
Yes, always.
So one other area that this movie seems to kind of tackle a little bit, I'm not sure it's as 100% successful as it is of some of the other themes that it kind of addresses, but there seems to be like this idea of I'm using this in quotations, listeners, but educated versus this primitive, where you have like the girls at this elite school. So you have that elitism, the rich, and they're being preyed on those in power. And then you also we have the only other characters we see in this movie are more of the quote unquote, again, working class, where you have Carol, the waitress at the diner, and the construction workers and the busboy. And then you also have this anthropological side of things, where he is actually talking about the quote unquote pagan rituals overseas. And there's some kind of correlation here where I think Eleanor even says it at one point that like we're less evolved than we think we are. We're just sort of out of the forest. And I'm not 100% sure that it's 100% successful, but I was kind of curious about your thoughts on that.
I agree. I think there's definitely something there with the anthropology, him being an anthropology professor. And at the beginning, he talks about this ritual where the woman crawls through something as like a birth, as like a spiritual
canal,
rebirth. Yeah, like a spiritual rebirth ceremony. And then there's like the jelly smearing, which I feel like has something to do, like feels like it's related to that. And there are these moments where they try to make this connection, but I don't think, like you said, Terry, it's that successful. I think it's brought up. I don't think it needed to be in the film. I don't think it really brought anything necessarily. Like I was more into like the gender dynamics rather, and they didn't really tie that in as much, or like they didn't focus on that as much. So I thought that I was like, oh, okay. So with this anthropology discussion at the beginning, maybe there'll be more of a connection to like gender dynamics in what they perceive as a primitive society, again, in scare quotes, versus our gender dynamics now. But yeah, it didn't go there, but that's,
I'm gonna give a cheeky answer as a filmmaker, which is sort of like, hey man, I came up with the idea to throw a fucking head in a turtle tank. Like, what more do you need from the movie, man? Like, I'm doing everything I can.
But that's exactly that's all I want. Just that a fucking turtle, a sea turtle eating a head in an aquarium. Like,
yeah, I do think that to a certain extent, there's only so much a movie can accomplish.
I want it all, though, Travis. I want it to solve every issue that I possibly have with it. Come on.
Believe me, I listen to podcasts. I understand it's important. But yeah, I mean, sometimes it's like, yeah, we couldn't get to all of it. We did our best.
We prioritized heads in water, and that is what matters.
I mean, I applaud that aspect, because there is not enough fun ways to do a decapitation in films, I will say. One thing I do wish that more films would take from this is, okay, so first of all, I love that she gets away with it. There's the scene at the funeral where she like just walks away from the casket as it's getting laid to rest, and the priest is doing his priestly things, and she's just like, I've had enough with it. I'm walking away from it. And like, she walks into Judd and he's like, this is over, right? And she's like, yes. And then they just sort of, that's it. He knows that she did it. He can't prove it. She's on her way. But then we get a final jump scare in the movie that ends up just being Taj, just being, his lovable self. He just jumps up in the back seat and we think it's the killer coming to kill him. And it's just Taj, and it's a freeze frame of them laughing. And that's the final image of the movie. And why don't more movies have a fake jump scare at the end?
Yeah. Well, and also,
it's my favorite. It's like, I was like, oh shit, oh my god, and then it's like, haha, and then it's just like, it just ends the credits, just him laughing.
Ain't I a stinker?
Like,
yeah, it's weird.
Oh my god.
And is it supposed to just sort of like leave the audience with this feeling of like, life goes on, crazy shit happens, and life goes on, or is the filmmaker just sort of like, man, I really like this actor who plays Taj. I got to get him in the movie. I got to find another way to use him.
For that, I say thank you, Ken Hughes. I keep wanting to call him Ken Russell because I've watched The Devils recently.
Why not both? Yeah. I love him, and also I want to say, what about how he ended on this like very strange, like, hey, life goes on note?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many choices in this movie, and each one I think is the right choice.
Yeah. Exactly. I agree.
One final thing, because I love scores in movies, and the composer of this is Brad Fiedel, I think is how you say his last name, who goes on to do Fright Night 1 and 2, The Terminator 1 and 2, and True Lies as a composer. And he brings such a somberness and melancholy to this film. It's such at odds with what you would typically see in a slasher film. And I loved it.
I agree. There's also like that kind of like whenever there's like the killer, it's that weird kind of like wah, wah, wah. My very like professional description of the score, but it's so off-putting and so creepy, and it puts you on edge right away. And I really did enjoy that aspect of the film as well.
Yeah.
Plus, he had quite a career.
Is there a soundtrack available for this? Night School on vinyl. Let's Google.
There needs to be if it's not.
Pulling me to a Tower Records website, so I don't know what
that still exists.
Yeah, what is this? TowerRecords.com.
What?
Yeah, nothing's coming up for me. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of the artists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it needs to be, because it's a different score, but it stood out to me, and I was like, who did this? And I had to go look, and I was like, oh wow, Fright Night, Terminator, True Lies, hell yeah.
I think that we really need to make a campaign for this movie and make the soundtrack come out on vinyl and have a re-release. So that should be our goal for 2021, everybody.
Let's do it. That feels achievable.
There's still time. I mean, the 40th anniversary is in September. We got months.
Let's do it.
Maybe we can pass out fake diplomas to everyone who attends the screening.
Oh my God. Give them a tiny little head on a keychain.
Yeah, and little gummy knives you can chew on.
Guys, oh my God.
A little scorecard.
Yeah.
Report card type thing.
And then we'll do like a bobbing for apples type thing so that people can have their head in
Oh my God.
A bunch of like doll heads.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, if you get the doll head, you get a prize. Like if you get an apple, you get the apple. But if you get one of the heads, you get like some kind of special prize.
Yeah. This is great.
All right.
There we go.
Great, guys. We've got the campaign. All right, guys. So
Speaking
Terry,
of heads.
Terry, how many aquarium heads out of 5 do you give Night School? There we go. For some reason, my brain went empty.
This movie, man, I saw this again for the first time 3 years ago, and I loved it then. I completely forgot about the killer, and watching it again was like watching it for the first time. And there is something very special about this movie. I think it really needs to come back into our cultural awareness. Maybe this podcast can help foist it in that direction. I think this movie is great. I think I'll probably give it, 4.5, but I'm cutting that poor head into halves again. That's messy, but
half eaten by a sea turtle.
Oh, there you go. I wanted to provide dinner for the sea turtle, so I'm cutting that fifth head in half. And 4.5 aquarium heads out of 5. I think this movie is great. Go watch it. What about you, Mary Beth?
I agree. 4.5 aquarium heads, half eaten by a sea turtle. This movie was so surprising. It's got a cool killer, giallo influences, like really cruel kills, and it deserves the renaissance that a lot of other movies are getting right now, and I cannot wait to watch this movie again. Travis, you have the final word. How many aquarium heads out of 5 do you give Night School?
I would rate it 4 aquarium heads.
Okay.
But I will say the only head that matters is my 10-year-old head, and it blew that fucking head to smithereens.
Hell yeah.
And here we are talking about it, a few decades later. So
thank goodness errant babysitter.
Yeah, no, I know. And to be honest, I don't remember the babysitter doing a single thing the entire time. She sat me in front of the TV, left, and fucking traumatized me.
This is like the third time that we've had trauma via babysitter for the podcast, and God love them. Well, thank you so much, Travis, for joining us to talk about Night School and reintroducing us to this cult classic in the making. Where can our listeners find you, and what do you have that you'd like to plug?
You can find me at Travis Stevens on Twitter and Instagram. And what should I plug? I guess I've got this movie, Jacob's Wife, that is out in theaters and on VOD now all across the U.S. If you've got time, and you want to see a Gonzo vampire movie, hey, there you go.
There you go.
There you go. So, listeners, you've heard from us, but we want to hear from you. What was your experience with night school? Send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
And I'm at Gailey Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe.
Thank you to Eric Powder. Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Please stay safe out there. But most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
Won't somebody please think of the children? Won't somebody please think of the children? Somebody please think of the children!
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is the briefing room?
It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.